Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Thursday morning, March the 3rd. I'm glad to be here. This is One Child to be a Survivor to Another. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And the chat room is open, and I did pop a couple of links in there to what I want to talk about here this morning, what we were talking about on Tuesday morning. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate everybody who's listening to the archive and listening live. And, it's good to be able to do these shows. I'm glad I cut back on a few shows. I really need to take a break and a little rest. And just for the month of March, that's what I'm planning on doing. It's just cutting down to Tuesdays and Thursdays for my shows and on the weekends. So thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Today I want to continue talking about the shame and toxic shame from Hope for Us. She's a survivor, and she's got a website, hopeforsurvivors.com, hopeforsurvivors.com, and it's a great website. There's all kinds of great information on there, and I mean, you could spend, quite a lot of time looking around on there. She's got all kinds of stuff on there, and we went through this months and months and months ago, probably 6 months ago. But I just wanted to kind of go back over the shame portion of it. And so, hopefully you're getting something out of it. I know that it's very helpful for me. And I also want to give a shout-out here, to a website and to an organization down in the States. So, I'm not a counselor or therapist. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own shows and mainly to be a voice for survivors out here, as I know there's a lot of us. And, so many times we can't disclose the abuse, no one to talk to, feeling, really quite isolated, and I just wanted people to have a voice that, someone they could tune into that, understands and just to give you some validation and just to give you a sense of hope, to hold on and get help where you can, and get help if you can, right? And also to speak out against child abuse, which is my goal, which I'll be doing until I leave this earth. And so I want to be a voice out here speaking out against child abuse, standing up for human rights, standing up for child rights mainly. And so that's why I'm doing these shows. So I'm not a professional counselor or therapist, and this is mainly my journey, my healing journey. So, you have to listen at your own discretion to all of my shows. I'm talking about abuse. Abuse is a sensitive subject, and many people find it uncomfortable. Anyone can find it uncomfortable. So you have to know what's good for you to listen to. Ultimately, it is your choice to listen to my shows, so you make sure that you're making the right decision for yourself. Young people under the age of 18, I ask that you have permission to listen to my show, and that's because I care about children. And I think that young people should be protected at all times. And so if you don't know how to protect yourself online, make sure that you get that information. Type into your browser Internet Safety, Online Safety for Children, and learn that information on how to keep yourself safe online, right? So thanks for tuning in, and we'll get right into this show. And I have been I've been in touch with a guy who is sort of representing an organization called On One Accord Foundation, and their website is www.ononeaccordfoundation.org. And Grady Fox, he's been listening to my shows. He has given me some information about something that's coming up here really soon, and you have to register by March 5th if you want to apply for it. But I just want to give you this information. And Calethea is the founder of this organization. And this retreat is happening on March 19th in San Diego. So anybody who's in California or who's in San Diego listening to this, they're having a retreat. This is to do with incest. It's adult incest rape survivors. It's a retreat for adult incest rape survivors, AIRS, at the Grand Del Mar in San Diego on March 19th. And the retreat features renowned guest speakers, Dr. Robert Geffner, and this is what Grady Fox has given me here to sort of give a shout-out. So Dr. Robert Geffner is going to be speaking at this retreat in San Diego on March 19th. And also Dr. Lindsay Elvis, and they're going to talk about living after incest rape by giving attendees a reason to live, a reason to survive. Heirs can apply for one of many grants for the retreat, right? And so the general cost is $250 for the entire retreat per person. But if you want to apply for that grant, you have to apply by March 5th, and that's why I'm giving this shout out. So contact them if you're interested in this, www.ononeaccordfoundation.org, and because March 5th is coming right up, right? So you want to, if you're interested in trying to get one of those grants, to be able to go to this retreat, which is happening March 19th in San Diego, you need to get a hold of these guys. www.ononeaccordfoundation.org. They said the goal of the event is to help victims find ways to heal. And Calethea Horton, the founder and chairman of On One Accord Foundation, says it is important that we provide inspiration and resources to survivors to come together and explore the different types of healing techniques by providing some of the best clinicians to come and speak to our survivors. She said, so this will be a safe environment for survivors to share their story and learn from professionals and each other. And so they're looking for volunteers for this event too. So if you're living in the San Diego area, get a hold of these guys. So, and I hopefully will have Calethea Horton joining me on my show in the next few days, maybe in the next week. So we're just trying to schedule a date and a time, right? And so I hope you will tune into this. I'm looking forward to speaking with her and finding out more about what she's doing and more about the organization, right? So that's www.ononeaccordfoundation.org. So be sure and get a hold of those guys if you live in San Diego and you're interested in attending this retreat on March 19th, right? So thanks, everybody. We're going to be looking at this hopeforsurvivors.com. www.hopeforsurvivors.com. It's the website that written by Hope for Us. And what she did was she took a look at and read John Bradshaw's book, Healing the Shame That Binds You. And then she went through and created this website and sort of added some different information as well as her own story, talking a little bit about her own story. So you can check this out. It's a great website, so hopefully you will go take a look at this. So yeah, we'll get right into this where we left off on Tuesdays. Thanks everybody for being here. I appreciate it. And stay tuned for the guest information. As soon as I find out, what day and what time we'll be on, I'll be sure and update the show page as well as, sort of give a shout out about it. So, for the interview with Calethea Horton, that'd be great. So we left off talking about abandonment through abuse. It says abuse equals abandonment because when a child is abused, there is no one there for them. This is what Hope for Us is talking about. Young children, because of their natural egocentricity, take responsibility for their abuse, and it is easier for a young child to believe they are to blame for the abuse than to blame the parents who they rely on for survival. And I kind of relate to that because, it's what I remember, because I remember so much of my childhood, right? Whereas a lot of survivors, for protective reasons, sort of block out a lot of their childhood memories, especially if they were very much, hurtful or disturbing and caused them a lot of pain. Many survivors will block a lot of memories. I do have some blocked memories. It's mainly to do with the sexual abuse that I suffered from by a sibling. So I'm still working through that. But the thing is I remember some stuff, you know what I mean? And then some things are just sort of not quite there, you know what I mean? I just sort of remember bits and pieces. But most of my childhood I can remember. And I remember, I was talking about this the other day, that my parents used to fight in the car, and they'd take me grocery shopping with them, and they would be screaming at each other, like this is, in the evening, 8 o'clock at night. My dad would be speeding down the road like 90, 100 miles an hour. And my mom would be screaming at him, and he'd be screaming at her, and then she'd be hitting him, and he'd be hitting her, and they'd be in the front seat, right? And then, my mom would be screaming, "You're going to kill us," And I remember when I was in the back seat there, I used to think they were my kidnappers because I couldn't quite justify that those were my parents, it was just so shocking to me that the reality that these were my parents. I used to actually pretend they were my kidnappers because it was a little bit easier for me to deal with that thought than to think these are my parents. Whoa, because this was their normal behavior, whether they were in the house, whether they were in the car. They were always either verbally battering each other, or emotionally battering each other, psychologically battering each other, or physically battering each other. They were steady trying to hurt each other all the time, and so it was a harsh way to grow up. And I just remember, kind of in my mind, I guess my mind wanted to not believe that those two people were my parents. And so I actually, for a little while when I was probably about 6, 7 years old, was kind of thinking, I'll just believe that those are my kidnappers. because I really preferred to believe that, because my mind couldn't get a grip on it. It didn't want to accept the fact that these two people, these monsters in my mind, were my parents, right? So it is kind of interesting how people, children, when they're really young and being abused like that, how the mind works, you know what I mean? It's kind of interesting. Like, it was easier for me to think that it would be my kidnappers that would be acting like that or treating me like that, abusing me, than my own parents. And I think that's why I did that. So that's why I think she says it's easier for a child to believe that they are to blame for the abuse than to blame the parents, right, whom they rely on for survival. So that's why I think my mind did that when I was little, was to think that they were my kidnappers instead of my parents, right? It was a little easier to deal with them then because, as a child, you're looking for that nurturing, that love, that comfort, that bond, that attachment with your parents. And I didn't have that with either of my parents. And so that's why they seemed more like kidnappers to me. You know what I mean? Very, very strange. So sexual abuse, John Bradshaw believes that sexual abuse is the most shaming of all abuse, and physical sexual abuse, hands-on touching, right? This is what we were talking about yesterday. Overt sexual abuse, covert sexual abuse. She talks about boundary violation. This involves children witnessing their parents or other adult caretakers involved in sexual behavior. This is what we saw in our home because my dad was always attempting to sexually assault my mother, right? Marital rape, but it's rape, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. It's rape, and women have a right to their own body. Men have a right to their own body. Children definitely have a right to their own body. And let me tell you what, I do not support anyone who supports marital rape. So, anybody who wants to come on my page and support people who maritally rape other people and call it relationship, type stuff, and will not admit that it's rape, you can kind of go away. I know earlier this week I had somebody in my chat room sticking up for people who would do these type of things, you know what I mean, saying, not saying that it was okay, but they were basically saying that people should, overlook these types of things. That this type of stuff cannot be overlooked. It's rape. I don't care what anybody wants to say. Marital rape is extremely damaging to either partner, whoever's being raped, by their partner. It's absolutely horrific. We have a right to our own bodies, and sometimes when there's issues, between the parents and they need to work them out, raping the other person is not the answer. Getting that person some help, and getting some counseling is the answer. And so my parents never tried to reconcile their relationship, and so my dad was just forcing himself on my mother and actually raped her in front of me one time. And I had a psychologist one time psychiatrist say, well, how do you know it was rape? They might have just been playing, kind of, how adults will sometimes do things like that, play sort of rough or whatever. I was like, well, that's because my mother was screaming and hollering and trying to get away from him, punching him in the face, and, that's about all the details I'm going to get into. But, this is, when somebody's hurting somebody, when someone's being hurt. And, for my dad to rape my mother in front of me like that was absolutely horrific, and I was 5 years old. And so, I was always trying to protect my mother because of that. I knew her situation in the home. I knew she was being abused by my dad. But that's why when I used to see her getting back at him, like, she would hit him on, in the head with really heavy objects and stuff, bust lamps over his head and things like this. And I actually used to support her in it, because I thought, yeah, you need to stick up for yourself, And the thing is my mom was my main abuser, but that's how incredibly dysfunctional and how incredibly sick and twisted our home life was. You know what I mean? It was very, very disturbing, and especially for small children to have to grow up around stuff like that. It's not good. It's not healthy at all. And so they said parents need to close and lock bedroom doors so that children don't accidentally walk in, and children need appropriate privacy as well. And she says here, if parents or other adults do not respect a child's privacy while they're undressing or using the bathroom, this constitutes a boundary violation. It sure does. My dad he's kind of like a pervert, I was talking about that on one of my other shows, and he used to, like, walk in the bathroom, when I was having a shower or whatever, or bath, and he'd just stand there, and I'd be like, get out, and he wouldn't leave, he'd just sit there and ogle, right? And that's why I kind of thought my dad was the person who sexually abused me, because for so long I wanted to believe it was him, because I really, when I was younger, hated my dad with a passion. And So in my mind, I felt it much more justifiable that it was my dad that sexually molested me and used me. So I thought it was him because it was easier to think it was him because I didn't care for my dad, which I love my brother, and that's why I think it was harder for me to get a grip on the fact that my brother had sexually molested me and had been sexually abusing me. So that's the thing. It was pretty twisted, and there was a whole lot of sexual abuse going on in the home. And it's just sad, and that so many people will minimize abuse, because it just makes it easier to deal with then or whatever. Abuse is abuse. Truth is truth. And it's like so many people would support my parents, So many people would support their craziness, their mental illness, their abuse. My parents were brought up on charges and social workers were around. People knew this. People knew there was problems in the home, and they just, overlook it. Oh, well, they must have just a bunch of bad kids or, but they liked my parents, and they would invite them to barbecues. And my parents had a lot of support, right? But the children had no support, and that's really sad. I'm one of 7 children. I'm the last of 7 children, and we had no support, But my parents had lots of support, and even there's still people that living today who support them because they're so ignorant. That they just wouldn't even want to consider the fact that my parents were brought up on abuse charges and that they were completely horrifically abusive, So that's the problem with abusers. Many times they are supported, and many times there is no support for the children, right? So emotional sexual abuse, they said when a parent or other adult relative or caretaker bonds in an appropriate way with a child, it can constitute emotional sexual abuse. When a parent uses a child to meet their emotional needs, it can easily become romanticized or sexualized. For instance, she says here, a daughter can become daddy's little princess or a son can become mommy's little man. And children need parental guidance. They should not be treated as equals like a spouse. That's what she goes on to talk about here. John Bradshaw wrote that book, which I have not read, and I would like to get a copy of it, Healing the Shame That Binds You. And he goes through and talks a whole lot about the boundaries and whatnot. And that's very important for people who have grown up around a lot of dysfunction and a lot of codependency. If their parents were codependent, which mine were, it can cause all kinds of problems. And there will be all these different roles, role playing that parents will expect their children to play out these roles, right? And they're unhealthy, right? That's the problem. If it's dysfunctional, it's unhealthy. So it's healthy families have healthy roles, right? And unhealthy families have these unhealthy roles. And parents and family members expect people to just continue to play them out, and that's their life script, So I like what John Bradshaw had to. I actually have looked at quite a bit of his stuff. I just haven't read his book, but he does talk a whole lot about the life script stuff. And there's another website that talks a lot about the rage and anger issues, and that's I believe it's called angerresources.com. Yeah, that's what it is. Anger Resources. ANGERESOURCES. Angerresources.com. That's a great website for people. I went through that website extensively last year. I forget when it was, but it might have been the fall. And we spent 5 weeks on it because I needed to go through that website and really go through the stuff. They talk a lot about the life scripts that people will be forced to play out, unless they tear up the script and write themselves a new one, which is what I did. And I had done a whole lot of work on that and talking about that, right, because that was a great website. I hope everybody will check it out. So, yeah, thanks everybody for being here. I appreciate you all taking the time to listen in. And if you need any of the resources that I have and information that I might have, be sure and let me know. So Hope for Us goes on to talk about physical abuse. Shaw believes that physical abuse is second only to sexual abuse in the amount and severity of toxic shame it produces. Physical violence can take many forms, such as physical spankings and beatings, being forced to get your own weapon of punishment, for instance, belts, wooden spoons, hairbrushes, hangers, switches, etc., punching, slapping, pulling, pushing, choking, kicking, pinching, biting, shaking, all this stuff, tickling to a torturous degree, being tied up, being burned, and talking about having things thrown on you. This is the physical abuse. It's absolutely horrific, and it causes all kinds of problems. A lot of people think, it's no big deal to spank a child or to beat on a child, right? And they think it's discipline, but it depends on how it's being implemented, right? Because if the parent is angry and there's emotional and verbal abuse going on at the same time as this discipline is going on, then it's going to come across and could lead to abuse, right? Whereas if the parent is properly disciplining, then most children know the difference. I mean, the reason I say this is because I was abused as a child, physically as well as everything else. And so, but I remember some spankings that I got that I felt that I deserved them. You know what I mean? Like I was misbehaving. I got a few spankings that I thought, well, I got a spanking, no big deal, right? So that's why, there's a real difference between discipline and abuse, right? A couple of the spankings that I got I really felt were no big deal because I knew that I was acting up, and it's not that I felt like I deserved it, but I could see why. You know what I mean? I got a little smack on the butt, so I did get some normal spankings as well for things that I was doing. But I was also beaten on horrifically when my mother was mad and angry, in a rage. Those are completely different. That's when a parent is cursing a child, throwing a child around the room. That's discipline. Beating on your child with a rolling pin or heavy object, even with your fists. That's not discipline. Slapping your child across the face and knocking them down and almost breaking their nose is definitely not discipline, right? That is abuse. And there's a difference between abuse and discipline, right? So I wish people would take a little bit more time to sort of think about that when they are disciplining their children and make sure that they're not abusing them, because children need discipline. They actually, if you don't help to guide and to teach your child, they'll just grow up really on their own without any concept of consequences, and so they won't be able to help themselves later on in life either, because they will never be able to know what the boundaries are, what social boundaries are, what is proper behavior, what is improper behavior, right? So you cannot let your child grow up to be a monster, because then again, that's really a form of abuse, right? It really is. It's just what they call, inactive parenting, just letting a child, it's almost neglect, right? Letting your child just do whatever they want, even if it means they're going to hurt themselves or hurt somebody else. And you can't do that. So children, they do need discipline, but they need guidance. They need teaching. They need correction. They don't need to be beaten on, spit on, kicked around, burned, stabbed, raped. I mean, so many times people call that discipline, and it's not. So that's why on my show, I'm not talking about discipline, right? I'm talking about full-on, blown out, all the way, horrific abuse is what I'm talking about, right? Abuse is incredibly wrong, and that's why, there is a serious difference between discipline and abuse. I always have people say, well, I was beaten as a child, and I wasn't abused, and it's like, well, you were probably properly disciplined. You know what I mean? If you did not feel that it didn't cause you any shame, rage, anger, embarrassment, feeling that you were worthless, if it didn't cause you self-esteem issues and didn't cause you to feel that your parents didn't love you and that they didn't care about you because they were screaming in your face that they didn't love you, and you weren't sexually used in any manner, whether that's unwanted sexual touching, molestation, rape, and all that, then I would say chances are you were not abused. Children know the difference, and then growing up as adult survivors, we know the difference. I could look back at some of the things that my mother would tell me that made sense, because I was doing things that weren't good for me or that were not going to be good for me as a teenager. I was using a lot of drugs, and I just went that way. That's the way that I went, right, because of the dysfunction in the home. And not everything. There were certain things that my mother said that I actually thought, well, okay, I'll take that, But other things, when she used to curse me and tell me that she wished I had died, that she wished I was dead with all the other stillborn babies that were dead, things like this. She would tell me stuff like, I should have killed you years ago, as she was slamming me up against the wall, and slapping me around and kicking me to the ground, this type of thing, right? That's abuse. There's a real big difference between a parent trying to help their child and a parent who's trying to hurt their child, right? And so I know the difference, right? And that's the whole issue is most of us do if people will stop and think about it for a minute. So be very careful what you're doing to if you have children, be very, very careful and get the information if you don't know how to properly discipline and how to properly help your child. Because discipline, really, that's all it really is helping. Parents who are hurting their children are not helping their children. But a parent who's properly disciplining their child really is helping their child, because it's a healthy way of doing it, and it's to help the child to grow, to learn the proper boundaries, and to learn, that certain things they do can hurt them or hurt somebody else, and are not good, right? So that's the whole issue. There's a whole big difference between discipline and abuse, and I always get a little frustrated when people try to mix the two, because it's like, well, have you ever been, raped, and have you ever been beaten and stabbed and burned, and, then no, chances are, you're probably okay. There's lots of people out there like to confuse the issue, and it's very simple. It's not that hard to understand. So they say that emotional abuse, John Bradshaw believes that emotional abuse is universal. He does not believe that a single person has been spared the shame of emotional abuse. Anger says, when anger is shamed, two things happen. Number one, anger is shame-bound. Every time you get angry, you feel shame. And two, when anger is shamed, it gets repressed. As anger energy is repressed, it builds and grows unconsciously and turns into rage. That's why I really like that one, angerresources.com, because Anger Resources really talks about anger, and obviously that's why it's called Anger Resources, but it really shows you what anger turns into. It's really a perversion, because anger is normal, and anger is actually necessary. It's okay to have anger. Anger means there's something wrong, and we need to either get help with it, or we need to fix it, or we need to be careful, or whatever. That's what anger really is. Anger is a warning sign. So anger is okay, but there's all these perversions of anger, and that's when it becomes a perversion of anger, like when it becomes abusive, when it becomes self-destructive, when it becomes rage, because rage and shame are really just perversions of anger. You know what I mean? So I hope everybody will go check out angerresources.com. That's a great website for that type of information. I learned a lot on there. So they talk about sorrow. When sorrow and sadness are shamed, its energy builds into inconsolable grief and can lead to suicidal feelings and attempts. In our culture, children are either outwardly punished for crying, as in I'll give you something to cry about, or verbally ridiculed or bribed to stop crying. I know that in my home it was more the I'll give you something to cry about thing, and I think I've actually in my lifetime heard a lot of parents tell that to their children. I'll give you something to cry about, you better stop crying. That's a horrific thing to do to a child who's already upset and crying and really doesn't need to hear a threat coming across that there will be possibly some physical abuse or verbal abuse or things like that happening because they're upset. You know what I mean? My mother used to tell me stuff like that, and actually she used to follow through with it. And we were not allowed to cry. And our family was so completely toxic and twisted and dysfunctional. Like my mom, after she would beat me, she would say, stop crying, right? Because of course I'd be crying. I'd be laying on the ground half dead. And, she would be like, if you don't stop crying now, I'll give you something more to cry about, right? So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I can't take any more beatings here today. So I'd have to put a smile on my face. She'd be like, you're going to smile, and you're going to pick yourself up off the ground. This is after I've been beaten, sometimes bloody. And that is ridiculous for a parent to do that to their child, to completely take a child who is, as far as I'm concerned, loving, caring, because children are precious, you know what I mean, and they should not be treated like that. And turn this child into this thing that's on the floor, bleeding and whimpering and crying and unable to even grasp why the parent did that to them, you know what I mean? And then to be told to put a smile on your face, or you'll get some more, So that was my mom's favorite thing. She beat me with a rolling pin one time, and cracked my head open, and blood was pouring out all over the kitchen floor, and I was just quite messed up from this beating, right? And then she tells me, do you want some more? She's like screaming in my ear, do you want some more? My mother was sadistic, really very much sadistic, and a sick person, right? She was mentally ill, and also just a violent woman, right? But she grew up, that's how she grew up, so she was just passing it on, right? But so many of us, have been there, where, and as far as grief, and sorrow and sadness, my whole life was really based on sorrow and sadness and grief. And that's why I really had suicidal feelings all the way up until I was 41, which is about, just not quite 4 years ago. So, but the difference between today and 4 years ago is really like night and day, because I made a commitment to myself that I was going to have a good life, and I was going to allow myself to heal and I was going to allow myself to survive. And so I stopped thinking of myself as a victim, really, and I started thinking, hey, I'm a survivor. I can heal. I can do this. And so, that was my commitment to myself, was to never give up. And so that's my big message for everybody out here who's listening. And if you're having issues and troubles because of the way you were brought up, and if you were abused as a child, you certainly did not deserve that, and you certainly deserve to have a good life, right? But it is up to us as adults to get the help that we need, even if it's self-help, whatever it takes, right? So never give up. That's what I have to say. Two of my brothers gave up, and I wish that they wouldn't have. They let my parents win this fight by doing that, by killing themselves. So, I decided that I was going to stick around, and by me staying here and having a healthy life, and taking good care of myself and learning how to survive and how to live, it was just going to be that I would win this fight against my parents. You know what I mean? That I'd be a slap in the face to my parents who really tried to destroy us and wanted to destroy us, right? So, to me, I've won this fight already. So it's a good feeling to be on this side of it, you know what I mean? So if you're having a hard time, you make sure you phone somebody, you phone a crisis line if you have to. But do not ever give up, right? You just keep going. There's a lot of bad days in between, but you know what? There's also some really good days. And, if we don't look for those good days, then truly it is our decision. We have to seek it out. We have to search it out. So whatever way, that you can find to get some help is what, just make sure that you do that, because you do deserve so much better. But it is ultimately up to us as adults to make it happen, right? We can't expect somebody else to do it for us, because it's just not possible. I'm sure there'd be somebody out there that would be like, oh, we'll do it for you, but we have to do this work ourselves. But sometimes we need help, and whether that's a counselor, therapist, whatever, sometimes we just need help. So make sure that you do stick around, and if you need help, you reach out and get some help, right? Have a great day, everybody. I'll talk to you tonight. I'll be back on my show as well as Dreamcatchers Talk Radio tonight. So I look forward to talking to y'all soon. I'll be back on Saturday morning with One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, moving the show times to Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday mornings for One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. So have a great couple of days, everybody. Take good care of yourselves. Talk to you soon.